Okay, before the break, we started putting together the little page to introduce semantic HTML tags and start looking at some CSS, some cascading style sheet objects. During the break, there was an email came in earlier, and I didn't see it till the break that had a question, and this isn't really the answer to that question, but it reminded me of something that will be very important, and might as well do it with the HTML before we move on to the next section real quick. I've been walking around with this note in my hand, so I don't forget. So one of the things we looked at was these special characters. Whoops, sorry, I'm not sharing my screen. If at any time I forget to share my screen, please let me know. Feel free to unmute if you're on the Zoom call and let me know immediately. It might be a few seconds before I look up the TV and notice it. One of the things we looked at was these special characters. Some of the really common ones have words that we can use. Obviously, ampersand, pound sign, angle brackets, those mean something to the HTML code. So we can't just type them on there, even though they're on our keyboard, because they mean something specific to the computer's going to try to run the code for what those mean, not treat them as text. So there's some short words, but we can also just type in the Unicode value directly. That would be my recommendation. And the ones you will use most often, you would probably remember before long, and we can easily look up the Unicode value. And then we don't need special characters. And the Unicode value translates directly to other programming languages as well, because we can, no matter what language we're programming in, not just HTML, we can just type in the direct Unicode value and get that character. So that's also a better translation for software development in general. Another one that's HTML is HTML specific, and you're going to want to use a lot. I can put it up here. We've got this paragraph, random words, just something to fill the space, because the paragraph tag would have a size of 0 if we didn't put some words in there. And in order to give it a background color and things like that, we have to have something there. We want to spread those out. I can come over here and hit space a bunch of times. It looks like it should spread those out. This wasn't actually the question that was asked. It'll probably work for a solution to that. But like, okay, those words are going to be spread out. But if I come back over and reload the page, you might remember before the break, I mentioned that white space gets deleted before the code runs. So no matter how many times, if I hit the space bar a bunch of times like that, the browser's just going to assume that I wanted to make that code more readable in the background and delete all of them except for one of those spaces. So if we really want that, we have to put in a special character. And this is one you will use a lot. So ampersand for our special characters, NBSP for non-breaking space. So not a line break, just an extra space. Non-breaking space. And I do actually think about the words to remember that acronym. And then the change from HTML 5.1 to 5.2, we do have, it does require the semicolon at the end of the special characters. So then once it's typed in there once, we can hit copy and paste it a whole bunch of times. Then we get those words spread out. That's something that does happen quite often. We need those extras. We need extra spaces for some reason or another. If you want a breaking space, there is a tag. That's a line break tag. There was a time we were supposed to quit using it, and when they first did the HTML5 standard, they were like, stop using the line breaks in there. Use cascading style sheets to spread things out. And that one was announced well ahead of time. And I think they were hoping the developers would stop using that and get out of the habit of using it. And nobody did. Developers just kept using it and just ignored the validation. So
I don't know who one of these people are.
What was that, Jessica? I thought you asked a question. Maybe she accidentally unmuted. Yeah, so programmers never quit using it, so they just didn't really remove it from the standard like they wanted to do. Well, they can't remove it because it would destroy backward compatibility. And people were going to do that, so they ignored the validation thing, which you should probably look at before we move on to the CSS. That is part of your homework assignments. I'll go look at the homework assignments for this week. I left it in here. I have put a whole lot of code onto the internet that did not pass the validation standards. So every time I see this in the instructions, I'm like, yeah, I can't. From all the invalid code I put on the internet just because it worked fine, it seems like it negates the ability to grade somebody. But it's something to be aware of. So to be aware of it, run your code through the validation. After you finish, you'll just go to one of these links. I believe they are in every single homework assignment. And this one you upload your file, or if it's on the domain, just tell it where to find it on the internet. And then we'll look and give you a green check mark if your code matches all the HTML5 standards, 5.2 now. Otherwise, there'll be little red boxes that say what doesn't fit the standards. And you'll take a picture of that and send it to me. And if you don't send me the picture, I'll put in the comments, like, remember to validate your code. But really, be aware that there is a standard and there's the code validation, because there's reasons for all of it. But I have put a whole lot of code on the internet just because it worked that wasn't even close to passing validation standards. Not really any point. I won't be judging it. Like if you keep doing stuff and it doesn't pass the validation standards, just send me a picture of it. Just let me know that you remember that there is a validation standard, and then same thing for the CSS. You just tell it where the site is, and it'll go confirm that you match the standards or whatever. But if the page looks right, that's what I'm concerned with. There's one assignment, I think module 4, it might be before then, but the textbook has you do some stuff and it won't pass the validation standards. So there is at least one assignment that it's like you do some stuff, but it's 2 or 3 more chapters later in the book before it covers what would pass the validation standards for. So in general, I think all the homework assignments will. But be aware of that. Oh, okay. I figured that's what happened. Okay, so now back to this. We got our HTML there. Just might want to make it look a little bit better. So we saw the other day we can do embedded style, a style element, opening and closing tags, HTML tags for style, then put a bunch of CSS rules in there. Or we can treat it as an attribute. We have a style element, and there's overrides. The main one that we're going to do in this class and in general is external style sheets. So we'll just have another file that has a whole bunch of cascading style sheet rules in it and bring that in. The reason we use external ones is, well, if we did it in this file and then did 20 pages on our website, we'd have to copy and paste it over to all 20 pages. If it's an extra, or if we made a change, we'd have to change it on all 20 pages. That's the harder part. Copy and paste is easy. But if it's an external style sheet, all the pages just refer to those same style rules, and we can just change it there. I used to have an example I no longer have because I lost the flash drive, but actually the flash drive. Somebody broke in my house and stole some stuff and grabbed my backpack, and the flash drive happened to be in the backpack when they grabbed it to carry things out. But there's like 90 something HTML pages on the site, 75 JavaScript files, and only 1 CSS file. So the style rules, that's what makes our website obviously good. One website makes it clear that all the pages go together. That's why we say what it looks like, what colors are we using, what sizes, what fonts, all of that. And that's how we can look at something and tell that those pages belong to the same site. So usually there's just one style sheet. So I'll create a link to an external style sheet. So up in the head section, we saw this the other day, we use the link tag. And there's 3 things we need. Order does not matter in our HTML attributes. So we have a couple of attributes. One of them, which we could omit because CSS is part of a standard, but this is something you will see elsewhere in programming, so you might want to get used to it. What's called the MIME type, and that's where the server transmits information about what type of type it's in. And for us, we're sending text-based data to define a bunch of CSS rules. So that attribute just tells the server that when you send this file, make sure you tell all the machines that receive it, it's Unicode holding a bunch of cascading style rules, cascading style sheet rules. The relevance of it is it's a style sheet. And then we need to know where to get it. So going and getting it is either a source or hyperlink reference. And for style rules, well, like that one I just said, 90 pages and only one, over 90 pages and only one style sheet to set the colors and sizes on all of them. But obviously not every style rule applied on every single page. So we don't need all of the data for it. We might, but there's not a guarantee that we'll need all the data like if we were loading in an MP3. So we use a hyperlink reference, and all of your reference material, our textbook and everything, textbook, any place you look it up, is probably going to call it style.css. But especially here in a class where you're getting just arbitrary practice sometimes, and you have projects and homework assignments, you're going to end up with a whole lot of files called style.css if you start doing that. So feel free to give it a unique name. I'm going to go with landscape just because of how I set the colors up here. And I always put this slash, talked about that the other day on the standalone tags. Ever since they started doing the first standard HTML 5.0, they wanted to put that slash in there. Other markup languages that we will use extensively as programmers, in particular XML or XAML, that's XAML, that's Microsoft's version of XML because they're Microsoft, they have to insist on doing their own thing. Those do require it. So other markup languages do require it. And every time they've made an update to that standard, the one that's, right, we have 3 numbers in a version. The smallest number that changes a lot, sometimes weekly. They quite often want to, even on that smallest number, try to put that slash back in there. They write it in there. They're like, yeah, we're going to start including the slash on the standalone tags. But they've always dropped it at the last minute before the standard actually goes through because that would destroy backward compatibility. But eventually they might find a way to figure out a way to do it that's not going to destroy backward compatibility. And if you're, so you could omit it. If you're heading on like the web app development degree here, you're probably going to do HTML all the time, and then you'll be okay. If you're in one of the other software development degrees, probably going to use a bunch of other markup languages where that slash is required. Go ahead and say now, please go ahead and include it because it will be worth your while for that happen. HTML is the only place you can get away with leaving it off. And every time they update the standard, they want to include that. So what type of data is it? And I just included that for reference because you will use that on non-CSS stuff a lot more than CSS. CSS is standard. So obviously if we say we have a style sheet, it's CSS. Landscape.css. And I should probably create that file. So I'm going to copy that and a new file here and give it that name. Landscape.css. And then we can start putting our style rules, which we talked about the other day. They're always going to look like this. So selector, how do we select something? Then we have a curly brace. And then we have a property, colon, and the value we assign to that property. So it's fill in the blank for that. If anybody's done C++, it is a C++ struct. We're creating instances of a C++ struct, but we don't have to do it. But it's always that, so the browser does most of the work for us. The browser automates that. We just have to assign values to the data fields in the struct. If you've seen C++ before. If you haven't seen C++ before, that might sound confusing. That's more just to let you know where that's going to. If you ever need to do like background coding, have your own unique one of a kind software except CSS, so you know what it's coming in as. We're not parsing the text file with CSS, but it always looks like that. How do we choose things? We have lots of ways to choose things. We'll see the first one today, choosing by tag name. Classes, IDs, we can choose based on what attribute it is. We can choose based on where it's at on the page. We can choose based on what the parent is. We can select HTML elements based on what their child is. There are lots and lots of ways to select those. So that's one of the big things we'll see over the semester is different ways to select stuff. And we will not see all of them. We will run out of time before we see all of them. We'll see quite a few that. Then what property are we setting? Font size, background color, the alignment, something like that, and then some sort of number. So first thing, let's set some sizes here. So maybe I want that header bigger. Okay, that biggest heading level, but I want a bigger words than that. So I want to select the H1 elements. So if it shows up in a quiz, that's the select by tag name, select by tag. And let's say the font size on that, let's make that big. And let's talk about sizes for a second, because we have a lot. And there's some that at first are going to seem a little non-intuitive, but ultimately might be the best sizing options. So you want to get practice with those instead of going to the easy ones every time. I'll leave that up there because I'm going to refer to the pictures. Zoom in a little. So, sizes. Right off the bat, we're on a computer. We're talking about putting things on a monitor. So one of our sizes is going to be pixels. PX. And these are units. So this is like centimeters, inches, which are on there. Probably won't use those in the class, but they are on the list. I'll write them there, but then I'm going to erase them on the list because we're not. There's nothing fancy. Y'all know what centimeters and inches are. So. Might give that a try at some point. Pixels are not screen pixels. Programmer pixels. And screen pixels are not the same. They haven't been the same since the early 90s or so. Oh, cathode ray tubes, where the size was physically dependent on the size of the splat that an electron, if you run past some powerful magnets, slams into a screen and makes. It was a very definitive size based off the laws of physics. Back then, programmers knew exactly what it was going to look like on a screen because we knew what those laws of physics said that little dot that showed up would be. The ones you were all mostly probably seen in history books were the lime green monitors, black background. We knew how big the electron was going to be when it hit the screen. That was the last time programmer pixels and screen pixels were the same. I mentioned inches and centimeters are there. We have lots of things. One of the big ones that might take a little bit of practice is the traditional printing measurements. That's the main one I wanted to look at or talk about. So points, which probably everybody's probably familiar with from like Microsoft Word, right? Or your English class, make everything 12-point font. A point is 1/72 of an inch. One of the traditional measurements. 72 points in 1 inch. It just so happens 1.5 pixels per point. Since you might want to do some translating there, because oftentimes we'll use different sizes. There's different ones we can do. Percent of element. So if we go through and say make the header container 80 pixels tall, we can say make the text in there 40% of the container of the header. So we can do it as a percent. Another one that might take some practice is EM. So that's the traditional printing measurement. That's one that goes all the way back to the Gutenberg press. So EM is the size of largest letter in font, current font. So it changes as we use different fonts. If you're in a monotype font, it's going to be the same for every single one of them, every single letter, but most of them aren't. Usually a capital M or a capital W are our largest letters. So the size of an M in the font you're using is based off that. That one probably sounds a little less intuitive than the other ones, right? In general, there's a reason this one has been around for a long time, is in heavy use. When we base, especially our font size, so the text data, if the sizing is all based off the data we're presenting, it's a lot more consistent. If we set things at a different pixel, set a pixel size or a point size, it's going to behave different on different screens. But if all of our sizing is based solely off the data that we're presenting, the actual words written there, it's a lot more consistent with each other. So that's one we'll be using a lot. We'll start with that. There's lots and lots and lots of ways to measure it, but that'll give us some a few to start working with. So font size, and notice the property is spelled out fully with a dash. So the font size property, and then a colon for assignment. We'll assign that, let's say, 3.1 EM. It's going to be 3 times bigger than our regular font. Just for a little bit bigger than 3 times bigger. Hope that wasn't the default. There we go. We can see it got a little bit bigger. There's the same thing for our footer. So the footer, which would be small text. So I'm going to take this a step further in the selector, because I don't want just the footer. We can have more than one thing. In particular, I want this paragraph in the footer. So we can do parent-child selection by space delimiting things. So a footer paragraph, put a space, and that works with any selectors. When we get to the really complicated selectors later, you can also do that. the paragraphs in the footer, let's set their font size to maybe 0.4 EM. Pixels and points, and might do a percent. Pixels and points are fairly straightforward when we wrap up the class example and y'all start doing stuff. That'll be an easy one to try and make little changes, see what it does. Okay, that's a little too small on that. And what I just did there is probably what you'll do most common. Technically, we can predict what the cascading style rules are going to do. It's very mathematical. I mentioned it the other day. What took so long to create a standard is, well, any changes we make up here are going to affect the things down here. And same thing when we start moving things left and right. Changes in one place are going to affect changes someplace else. So every element needs to know about the other elements. So there was a long running debate. Is it better to do bubble or cascade? Bubble would be like this font size. The property applies here and then goes up to the top level. So it starts at the footer and then moves up to the top and tells everything about its change along the way. Cascading is the other direction. The top level gets that information first. So, okay, the footer is going to change, and then it tells every element on the way down to the footer that it's going to change, or that the footer is going to change. That debate went on for so long that machines got faster and faster and faster, and then cascading style sheets do both. They bubble up to tell all the other elements about the style change, and then they cascade down to confirm that everything knows about it. So technically we can predict it, but it gets a little complicated at times. Everybody's looked up like programmer humor sites on Reddit or something, seen jokes about programming. There's a classic one, two CSS properties walk into a bar stool and a different bar falls down. It's kind of a classic joke. I always look around and tell who's worked with CSS before because they laugh at that joke. The rest of y'all will get that before long. It's not bad to look at those. Those jokes help with understanding, right? For one, they commit it to memory. But they help to commit things to memory. But it would take forever to do that prediction. By the time we sat down and actually calculated the prediction, we could have ran 10 or 15 trials. Change the number, try again, change the number, reload the page, change the number, reload the page. And most people go with trial and error. And after you do it a few times, you'll get more used to it. Let's say maybe 2/3 of the size of the other ones. That's a better size. So that trial and error is what you'll probably do the most instead of sitting down and calculating how the things interact with each other. Unless you're doing something like those ones we looked at earlier, right? Those paintings made with CSS, or what they call CSS paintings. That probably does require some precise calculations, but if you're doing something that takes 20,000 lines of CSS, you're probably not going to be doing a lot of math either. Willing to sit there and do the trial and error, so I doubt she did those calculations. That's some basic ideas on sizing. We have all the other ones, so maybe in our, what else do we have? In our nav, everything in nav, we can set our font size to 1.5 EM. And what was the other one? In the article, set our font size to 0. Let me use pixels here. Instead of using EM every time, let's say, well, the default is going to be 12 point because I know where my computer's set at. Let's say 15 point, or on the second one, 22 pixels. gives us some different ones for the class examples so you can see. We can mix and match those. We don't have to choose one and stick with it. Choosing one and sticking with it takes stuff away from us. Percents are on there. You can try things with percents. And notice those are about the same size. I didn't do the math precisely. It's 1.5 pixels per point. So 15 point font should be 22.5 pixels. Actually, that doesn't look like that. Those look about the same. So trial and error got it down. And point can change depending on the font file you're loading in. Let's have some colors in and then look at fonts, because our textbook doesn't cover that or cover that. I'm gonna come up to the top, and the order does not matter. The cascading style sheet does get compiled before it gets ran. I mentioned that it's sort of a C++ thing, actually, that it's built out of. So it will compile, and then order doesn't matter. But they will get long at times. So at least personally, when I'm doing things, I try to keep it, the style rules or the selectors roughly in the same order they are in the page. Sometimes that's impossible, so we have to go top to bottom, and we might have the page in 4 columns. So they wouldn't line up that way, but I try to keep roughly the same order just to help find things. Let's say background color. So the default is text because it's HTML hypertext. So we don't have to say foreground color to change to the text color. But for the background color, we do need to do that. I guess we're not going to get to the coloring today. We'll get to coloring next week. But it does know certain words. I think sky blue is one word. Okay, so I got one thing. And notice how I keep having to make a change, come over here and make an adjust, do the adjustment and back and forth. That can be time consuming. So another thing, we already looked at how we have debugging tools built into all our browsers. On Edge, you have to give it permission the first time. Opera might also require permission. If I open this up and go to sources, you see right here is that source landscape.css file. And if we make changes here, we see them in live time. They do not save. We're going to hit reload, it's back to what is in the file. But that can be very, very useful. Oh, whoops, that's not showing on the TV in the room. Let me zoom out of the way. That can be very, very useful to find the property you want. Today, I'm just going to use the named colors, so close enough will be good enough. But when you really start nitpicking the details, looking for those fine adjustments, it can be really useful to do the trial and error here. Just remember to do that in the actual file afterwards. Because it doesn't say, sometimes things do get lost. So we need to watch out for that. So maybe you could go to there's not a header one yet. So in the header, need a background color. The dark gray, what does that look like? That'll work. So I'll go with that color. And I'm going to highlight it and Control C to copy. So when I reload it, it's going to be gone. But if I copy that and get the zoom thumbnails out of the way, I come back over here and then paste that in there so it's not completely lost. that's just a really useful thing. You might want to keep an eye on that. It really helps with the trial and error. But now that I've said that, I'm just gonna come back over to the file and do that. So the second one was the nav. And on the picture I drew up here, that was gonna be something yellow to get that rough idea of the landscape now. So for the nav, we need the background color yellow or reload that. I gotta move the inspector out of the way. Well, started to work only, that was, since scale obviously supposed to be, give a hint of the sun, so it probably needs to be taller and not all the way across. So we can hard code in with, the order does not matter. It's going to be compiled code before it shows up on the page. So you can put the properties in any order, the selectors in any order. The order doesn't matter until you get to override it. Because if you put one thing for the header up here on, say, line 8, and then down here on line 27, you did something else that would affect the header, so the one on line 27 would take precedence. Because line 8 would run first, and then when the computer gets down to line 27, it's going to run that code and just change what you did earlier in the file. So overrides, the order matters, but otherwise it doesn't matter which way we put the properties in or anything. Let's see, we haven't done 30%. Let's say make that 30%. And there is a max and a min width. I just did width right now, but from experience with HTML and CSS, I can tell you that pretty much 100% of the time you want max width or min width, not just the width property. You want to know what you want to say, what that maximum or minimum is, or maybe both of them, and not just the one number. Pretty much always. But remember, there's a max, max, and a min for the width. Same thing with height. Let's see, our font size is 15 points. So if we make that 3.8 EM or 4 EM, I'll do a whole number. That work. And bigger, maybe that's too wide. Let's say 18%. And there's going to be a lot of this on your own stuff. That homework assignment here, they'll tell you what color, what size. You want to do a lot more of this in the time available. Let's see. The footer needs to be green. Footer is forest green. Because if you just type green, it's lime green. Oh, maybe that's not how to spell it. Is it forest dash green? Oh, I just made a silly typo there. The footer gets the color forest green. If you notice me make typos, feel free to say something. Oh, doesn't seem to know what forest dash green is, so try without that. Okay. No, dash. Oh, that wasn't the color. That was a background. It's supposed to be background color. Okay. And represents like some ground. I think you all kind of see where this is going, right? And if you make the change in the inspector panel, remember to change it in your code because that does not save with the file. I can make that big cloud looking thing up at the top narrower. Background color dark gray, let's say width of 40%. So almost half the screen size. There we go. Except something happened at the bottom. You may see what happened. I didn't save the changes. If you haven't had me in class before, I do like to, well, there's not so many error messages that we'll see in this class. In some of the other programming classes, especially, it makes the sentence make more sense that way. I like to throw the error messages and show you how to fix them and how to spot them, not how to spot the problem and how to fix them, and instead of just telling you to avoid them, because me telling you to avoid them is probably not adequate adequate for long-term usage. Notice how when we made that small, it automatically wrapped the text. Well, things like that are useful. We can set sizes. So picture has the sun over on the other side. We're going to talk about layout soon. That was for the nav. One of the nice ways, the easiest way to do that is float. We can float it left or right. So if we float it to the right, and we reload it, we get that over there. But notice what it did. That's the yellow box, I'll just say sun, is explicitly 20% of the screen width. Because whatever number we typed in there. And the rest of this stuff only has a little bit way over the other side. So it fits there. The computer's like, oh, this fits here. So whenever you use float, you usually want to use clear as well. So along with float, there's clear. And clear is the side you want to look at. So clear on the, if I say clear left, this is going to check everything on the left-hand side to make sure the left-hand side is free to fit. So that's not going to change. But if I say clear on the right, that's the side we're worried about. But the browser, okay. It's not going to put those words until it's clear on the right. We'll see more spacing and things soon. I guess I could make those words light green. Color green. Make those sort of a light green so it looks like grass above the back bottom. Oh, maybe lime. Notice how all those color names are consistent. And same thing with the properties. Any place everything's spelled out, dashes between words. We get quite used to that. Yeah, we'll talk about spacing soon. Floating. Yeah. Make sure you use float and clear together, and really you want your page to be adaptive. There's also absolute positioning. We'll talk about that in a couple weeks when we get to layouts. And if you start positioning things absolute, putting anything in the absolute position, you have to stick with it. Everything else on your page has to be absolutely positioned. So you have precise control over where it's at, but it doesn't change for screen size or device type. And once you do one thing, position one thing absolutely, you can't start doing other stuff. The adaptive web pages are going to be a big deal. Okay, so like if I go back in the inspector, and usually in most browsers, F12 will open that up. So if I go over here and turn on the emulator to see what that looks like on a phone, you still have basically the same thing. Floating is adaptive. I use percents. So it went to a narrower, taller screen, those percents adjusted accordingly. Little things like that. We'll talk about that thing I just clicked on soon. All your browsers should have that. So some basic starting points on the style stuff. Does anybody have any questions about that? There's a long list. The textbook has a lot of things. I would recommend starting with the appendix in the textbook. If you look at the entire CSS list reference page, you are going to be overwhelmed. So start with like the chapter in the textbook and let it build slowly. So there are going to be quite a few that you want to commit to memory if you're going to do this on. And if you went right to, like, say, some of the best reference sites on the internet, you're just going to be overwhelmed by how much there is to do. We looked at the beginning tonight of today, so night class. Still have many hours left of the day. We looked at the beginning, those things that look like oil paintings. Okay, there is a lot we can do with CSS. There's a lot of properties. So if you went and tried to look up the entire list, you're just going to be overwhelmed and maybe miss some of the ones that you might want to commit to memory. So start slow, let it build up over time. There's a start to that. Back to the reminder. And this thing, I just did it a second time because I erased it and forgot to do the second part the other day. But this part, CSS sizing and color was left off the predictive list. And that was more than, again, that was more than 15 minutes. That went from 2:25 to 3:10. So that was 45 minutes. Which is all from that original guess of how long it was going to take. That's the entire build was 45 minutes. And just that one part took us 45 minutes. And that's probably the only time I'm going to do it in class. Highly recommend it, but that's up to you. It will be worthwhile in the long run as your career, wherever you're heading in software development. It'll be worthwhile to practice those numbers. These are the only 2 lines that people are going to care about. We're going to do the whole project proposal and sales pitch, speech and presentation, all that. But they only care about those 2 lines. So you want to be really good at predicting those 2 lines beforehand, because it will make people very, very happy and assure that you're the one that gets the job every time, that they're going to tell all their friends about it. Last thing, real quick here, just I wanted to include it. The textbook does not cover it very well, is we can change font sizes. The textbook talks about some basic stuff, like they say for like the H1 header, we can say font family, and then we could give names. So we could say Times New Roman, if you know that's installed on the machine. It's case sensitive, so what I just typed wouldn't work.
No, if you had another font, would you have to install it on your machine?
That's what I was getting ready. That's what I was getting ready to show. So it has to be on their machine somehow. If we didn't know what they have, we could say serif or non-serif. We can do a list. So we could say like Times New Roman, Roman. If Times New Roman isn't there, then go with Rodana, which is not a serif font. I couldn't think of a serif font very quick, but that's another one that I know how to spell. And we can make a list, like choose this one first, then this one, then this one, then this one. The book covers that. Might want to do that anyway. There is a fallback. One of those was a serif font and one was sans serif. You can't just say choose the default serif font or choose the default sans serif. Does everybody know what those are? I see head nods here in the classroom, just in case. Serifs are those little flags at the end of the letter. The little decorations on the letter. That's a serif font, and a sans serif font or sans serif font is the plain ones like Calibri. Not the decorative fonts, the comically look decorative fonts, but just the little flags at the end of the letters. It's called a serif. So that's what they did, but like Grace just asked, what about if you have a specific font that you want to use? Because a lot of companies are. If you're making websites for a living, you're probably going to be making websites for a specific company. And that company might have an official font, which probably isn't installed on everybody's machine. So where do we get those? So that, there's lots of places to go for them. For years, I've been going to 1001fonts.com. And they had 1,000 fonts when they started 20 years ago. They have way. I usually go here, 1001fonts.com. Put that in chat. Oh, turn off the DMs. And then send you all that link. I've been coming to this one for years. There's no shortage of these. What I really like about this one is they always include all the documentation and everything. So if it's a free font, you're free to use it. They say that. If it's somewhat restricted, you can use it free in some situations, but go royalties in other situations, they say that. If it's a proprietary thing, they tell you who to send the check to. All the documentation is included. That's one of the requirements to get on their page. And they had 1,000 fonts when they started 20 years ago. They started with the number they claim in their name, and it's only grown since then. Little adjustments to get around copyright infringements and things like that. So I'm going to search for a font called Harry Potter, because I know that's on here. There is definitely not a movie called Harry Potter. Definitely no copyright violations on that. But oh, that looks like a nice font. A nice little. That would be decorative. That would be a decorative font. So we hit download, and we get the zip folder. What's another one? We're gonna search for Godfather. That's another good one. This is the actual font that was made for that movie. But there's also a knockoff too that they just called it that. Maybe download both of those. Probably won't get to both of them tonight. Or today. This is in night class. I'm gonna go over there to where those downloaded. And I think everybody's seen fonts before, right? Unzip the folder. I don't think I'm gonna get to the second one, but we'll get the first one on there. There's this nice little picture, shows an example of that with extra decorations. Everything on that site I just pointed at has the README. This one's in German. Oh, this is my own work. Another annoying README file. So most Germans speak English too. So usually you see README in German, scroll down and you'll see English. If you like it, he wants promoted. So an artist asking for credit, so all you need to do is give him credit. If you want to donate, there's his address, mail him a check. All of that information is included on all of these. So that's why I like going to that site. You don't have to wonder about that. And then there's the font file, which if you double click on it, will install it on your own machine. That's not going to help us sending it across the internet. Actually, maybe I can just open it. Okay, yeah. Opens to an install button. I can install it on my own machine, get a preview of what it looks like. In particular, it's a true type font. There are multiple formats. 99.9% of the fonts you come across are either true type or open type font. True type font or open type font. So that'll be important for us. So now that we got that included, this is the one I really need. So I'm going to copy that. And we haven't seen images yet, but y'all are probably aware that if we want to put an image on a web page, we're going to have to send that, right? So jumping ahead a little bit, but I'm just in our modern world, I feel like I can assume certain things, about computers, right? An image is its own file. If we want somebody else to see it, we have to send them that file. So we can do the same thing here. We can send them this true type font. And then it doesn't have to be installed on their machine. We can just send the information, we can have the server send the information about that font with the rest of our webpage. Or image files and all that as other resources, songs, we're gonna put some music on there, videos, all of that stuff we need to send, we can just include a font. Which is usually what you're gonna wanna do instead of the way the book does it. And we need a special selector for this. Starts with the @ symbol, then font, face. Let's see, I'll put an example here. So this is what it needs to look like. Oh, to run when I was copying and pasting and getting ready, and like, just in case I forget what it is, I'll copy this out. I used that other font that I downloaded, maybe I should run that. We have to say what font family it is, because that's the property we actually assign, right? That's the one your book talks about, or I showed down here. If we want to say font family, make sure this one shows in Times New Roman, which needs to be a string, so put quote marks on it. If you have spaces in it, put quote marks in it. And otherwise, you can give it a name. If you're giving it a name specifically, make sure you don't put any spaces. That way you're not worried about getting quote marks later. So our font face, we need to say what family it is, so we can assign it to a property later. And that was going to be the Perry Hodder family of fonts. I like using that as an example. Remember, copyright thing is very specific. And then source, where are we getting it from? So we have a source property. And this is something unique. For those who have seen other programming languages or done quite a bit of programming, I only know of one spot that we do not put quotation marks around a file path, and that's right here in CSS. And that's going across a lot of different programming languages. Well, there are a couple random ones, but one common thing, one of the things we do most often when we ask for, so we'll assign the source this URL and then parentheses. They'll automatically recognize a function. But the URL here does not get quotation marks, which is just about the only place you'll probably come across that does not have quotation marks on the URL. If you need to, everybody probably knows you can right click and hit properties to make sure you have the right file extension, which will probably be going to a Linux server. So remember to make sure your file extension is case sensitive. If it works on your local machine, but not the server, you probably forgot it's case sensitive somewhere. So our source is going to be, in Pascal case, perryhodder.ptf. Oh, word wrap's on here. Can't tell word wrap's on my example there. And then what format is it in? So both of those are part of the source. Two things we have to assign to the source. All the assignments we've seen so far only take one. We can do multiple assignments to properties. This one requires two. So where do we find it? And what is the format of it? And this is a true type font, which is actually what I needed to look at in the example. How is true type font spelled? True type, all lowercase. That was what I opened the example for because I couldn't remember how to type that. So remember to keep reference material around. As you go through class and then afterwards you do things, keep your own stuff for reference material, because you will remember that when you see that, you'll remember that a lot better than trying to translate what somebody else did on a web some official reference material online or something. You'll see your own stuff and remember what you were doing. Also know where to look a lot quicker. I couldn't remember how to do that, and I've typed that many times. So now I can go to that cloud, I guess, and assign a font family to it. So font family, make it the Harry Potter font. With no worries about whether or not that's installed on the machine. Y'all saw, I just did a factory reset the day before. This was the first one I had. 2 days before the semester, I did a factory reset on Sunday. So 2 days before the semester started, yes.
How do you get this onto the CSS?
The link tag, let me pull that back up.
Okay.
You see it all there? The hyperlink reference goes to it. Put that link tag right there. But that's how, the textbook doesn't cover that, so that's something you'll probably want to do. It's something you will definitely need if you're heading into a web development career or intend to be a front-end developer. Control those fonts, because a lot of places, right, companies, businesses do have an official font to write their logo in. You will find that in most businesses. A lot of businesses, even if they're not strict about it, they will have an official font, official color, all that stuff. Schools obviously do, right? Official font, official color, school colors, official mascot. So y'all have seen that before, and that is something you will probably want to do in your final project. Make it look a little nicer. And you can look through the fonts there. This is a common site. Lots and lots and lots of stuff. But as you start scrolling and look at the newest ones, the first thing you'll notice is that you will recognize which movie those come from. Right? If they go, the default order is newest. If I start scrolling down, you will probably realize, be like, hey, I saw a commercial for that movie within the past couple weeks. So that seems to be the first thing artists tend to put on here. For recent, 2,423 pages of fonts. And how many does I need to write? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so the name says 1,001, but 24,000 pages with 10 fonts on each page. Notice the filters up here at the top. Just display, headline. So there's a bunch of filters so you can get to things a lot quicker. But maybe spend some time looking through there, find some fonts you really like. Definitely a useful thing. The main thing is what this reference material is. And now, as I put that online, meant to do this a few minutes ago. Does anybody have any questions about that? I can see people in here were typing along. If you weren't typing along, it'll be on my website in very shortly. Which again, I'm on the free account, so it might not be instantly on the free account. The things are done, so I'll go over here. Go to here, htdocs, and upload a folder. A scratch file, I'll just upload this folder, and it has all those resources right there with it. Okay, no error message this time, and I'll add it to the index page. Oops. Or table of contents that we started earlier. Come in here, and I'll just take all that, paste that, module 2, day 2 example, and this is a landscape folder index.html. Copy and paste as much as possible. Computers never make typos. Typos are a human trait. So there's a copy and paste as much as possible. And now if I maybe It'll be there this time. Here. Reload. There it is. So it took it a second to send the font information. But as y'all are well aware that web data is cached. CACHE, not money cache, like traditionally weapons cache, food cache, CACHE. So it's stored, so it'll be quicker next time. But all that's there, and if you need to reference that, you know, always right click and view page source. And notice the hyperlink reference to the CSS is a link here. It is a hyperlink reference in the source code as well. So you can go back there and see what that looks like. So right click and view page source, and what was this? What's this? And it was spring-sdev153.apz.com was mine. I put it in the chat. That way in case somebody needs to copy from it or refer to that. So there's where mine is, and that's where all the class examples are going to go. You want to use that as a reference site. At the end of our course, I will probably not touch it again. So after 90 days, it'll automatically shut it down because I'll be onto another course that has on a different domain. But make your own reference material on your way through school. It really does make a big difference. And afterwards, once you do something, keep it in an organized way so you can go back and look at your own code and remember what you were doing. In a classroom, trying to remember 3 weeks before is not much of a deal. But later in life, when you're trying to remember something you did 6 years ago, it's a lot better to look at your own code than somebody else's and trying to remember what you did to make stuff work. So one last thing to do, that one took about 15 minutes. So does anybody have any questions before we wrap up today? 85 plus 15 is 100 minutes. 100 minutes is what? 1 2/3 hours? 1 2/3, so that's 5/3 of an hour times $100 an hour. Should have been a little bit more. $166, $167, that it doesn't come out to a nice even number. But back to this point, see how it only took a couple seconds to do that? I'm probably not gonna do any class, I just did it today again because I erased it and forgot to do that last step the other day, but it does not take long. It will definitely be worth your while. And next time, have a better estimate of how long these things take. Okay, that was more than 5 seconds since I asked if anybody had any questions. I didn't hear anything. I was intending to be done about 20 minutes ago, so that took longer than I was planning. But there's still 20 minutes left of our class time. Good time to do stuff. We're going to step away from the computer for a few minutes, but give that stuff a try. So not just copying it from the textbook, try some just unique things. Like this general landscape feel. Right? Eventually get to that stuff like those paintings we looked at the beginning, or fancy pictures. But that's good practice. And this thing does take practice. It's an active subject we learn by doing. If you have any questions, let me know. Until 3:50, I'm not going to be doing anything except waiting for questions to come my way. Otherwise, I'll see you Monday, but ask me questions anytime. I don't have much of a life outside of this, so I am always happy to answer questions. Some of your classmates can probably confirm that at 2:30 in the morning, I will wake up and answer your questions. Well, have a good